What if you strapped a battleship gun onto a tank chassis? In the 1950s, the Soviets actually tried it 3 times. The result was a trio of colossal self-propelled guns: the 2A3 Kondensator 2P, the 2B1 Oka, and the bizarre Recoilless S-103. These machines were absurd overkill, spectacular to watch, brutal to fire, and so unwieldy they could barely manage a single shot before breaking themselves apart. But in war thunder, impossible projects often find new life. So today we're going to uncover what these superguns were really built to do, and then ask the big question: how could vehicles this insane actually work in the game? Where would they sit? How would they play? And what new mechanics would make them feel as terrifying as they looked? In the mid-1950s, the Soviet Union stood at a crossroads in military technology. The Americans had just unveiled the M65 Atomic Annie, a 280mm cannon capable of firing nuclear shells. It wasn't a practical battlefield weapon. It was heavy, slow, and only ever fired once in a live nuclear test. But it sent shockwaves through the Soviet leadership. If the United States could parade such a machine, the USSR needed to show something even bigger. What followed was a short but extraordinary series of experiments in super-heavy, nuclear-capable artillery. 3 designs emerged: the S-103 recoilless rifle, the 2A3 Kondensator 2P, and the 2B1 OK. The boldest of the trio was the S-103, a 420mm recoilless gun designed by Vasily Grabin and his bureau at Tesnai I-58. Unlike a conventional cannon, which relies on heavy hydraulic buffers to tame recoil, the S-103 vented gases backward to cancel the shock. The concept was meant to solve the brutal recoil that plagued weapons like the Kondensator and Oka, but in practice, it proved only a temporary fix. At first, designers even considered building both a 280mm and a 420mm version, but development difficulties forced them to settle on the larger gun alone. A chassis based on the same Object 271/273 family as its siblings was planned, but never built. Only the gun itself reached the testing range. The design was ambitious, a tracked chassis mounting a massive artillery system with both horizontal and vertical guidance mechanisms. Unlike other atomic superguns, the S-103 would not need a base plate or oversized recoil devices to stabilize the vehicle after firing. Instead, its internal architecture was radically complex. The shell sat in a breech compartment, separated from the propellant by a diaphragm. When fired, the charge burned in a separate chamber, generating pressures up to 2,000 kilograms per square centimeter. Some gases pushed the projectile down the rifled barrel, while the rest vented through rear nozzles to cancel recoil. In theory, this combination of dual gas flow and aiming freedom would make it far more practical than its Soviet siblings. In reality, it was a catastrophe. The first prototype was completed in late 1955, with trials beginning at Rzhevka in January 1956. On the 6th shot, the breech tore backward while the barrel launched forward. Engineers rebuilt it and resumed tests in May, firing 95 more rounds until the same destruction repeated itself in November. With no practical way to resolve the structural stresses, the program was terminated immediately. Alongside the S-103, Soviet planners pursued a more conventional solution: the 2A3 Kondensator 2P, essentially a 406mm naval gun mounted on a tracked chassis. Known as Object 271, the vehicle was derived from the T-10M heavy tank, stretched and reinforced. The exact chassis length is uncertain, but the entire machine measured nearly 20 meters overall. The Kondensator weighed 64 tons, carried a crew of 7 to 8, and was powered by a 750 horsepower diesel engine for a top speed of 30 kilometers per hour. Its SM-54 gun fired 570 kilogram shells at 716 meters per second to ranges of up to 25.6 kilometers, and in theory, farther with nuclear ammunition. Unlike its sibling, the Oka, it carried a token load of 1 round and 2 propellant charges on board. All other ammunition required external supply. The SM-54 was mounted on a cradle with hydraulic elevation drives, but had no traverse, forcing the entire chassis to be turned for aiming. Engineers added a fine-tuning electric turning system, but firing remained slow and clumsy. The gun could only be reloaded at 0 elevation using cranes and support vehicles, stretching reload time to about 5 minutes. And without ground spades, recoil punished the suspension and transmissions directly. The Kondensator's sibling, the 2B1 Oka, was built on a modified T-10M chassis, later designated as Object 273, and mounted a colossal 420mm mortar. Unlike its brother, the Oka had a clearer nuclear role. According to Zaloga, it was designed to fire the Transformator AR and Transformator D, tactical nuclear shells derived from the RDS-9 torpedo warhead, weighing about 650 kilograms with a 25-kilometer range. Other sources mention heavier 750-kilogram rounds, reaching 45 kilometers, and later reports point to the RDS-41, a 14-kiloton warhead, launched at around 720 meters per second. In design, the Oka was very different from the Kondensator. Its mortar barrel was 47.5 calibers long, reaching a staggering 27.85 meters in total, about 7 meters longer than the Kondensator's 406mm gun. Though designed for a crew of 7, only the driver rode in the vehicle. The other 6 operated from support trucks, handling loading and maintenance. Despite weighing 55.3 tons, the Oka could reach 30 kilometers per hour and elevate its mortar to 75 degrees. But with no recoil absorption system, each shot threw the entire vehicle backward by up to 5 meters, shattering suspension parts and wrecking accuracy. Despite their flaws, the Kondensator and the Oka achieved one undeniable purpose: propaganda. In 1957, these colossal machines rumbled through Red Square during the May Day parade. To Western observers, they looked terrifying, rolling nuclear cannons that seemed to give the Soviet army overwhelming tactical power. To Soviet citizens, they were proof that their country could match or surpass the United States in nuclear strength. But inside the Kremlin, the leadership already knew these machines were dead ends. By the late 1950s, Nikita Khrushchev was pivoting hard toward rocketry, declaring that ballistic missiles were the true future of nuclear war. All 3 programs were quietly canceled in the early 1960s. Only 4 Kondensators and 4 Okas were ever built. Today, a Kondensator stands in Moscow's Central Armed Forces Museum, while an Oka is preserved in the Artillery Museum of St. Petersburg. The sole S-103 prototype never made it to the parade. It was destroyed during testing, leaving behind only photos and reports as proof of its short-lived existence. So after the historical context, let's imagine a dreams come true event, where the Kondensator, the Oka, and the S-103 actually rolled into war thunder. First things first, we need to grasp just how massive these vehicles really were. And for that, I came up with a brand new measurement system: weasels per mouse. Using the tiny German weasel as our yardstick and comparing everything back to the mouse, the scale gets absurd quickly. The Kondensator was 1.69 weasels wide, narrower than the mouse, but over 3.15 weasels tall, 2 meters higher than Germany's steel giant. In length, it stretched to 5.6 weasels, literally twice a mouse nose to tail. The Oka went even further, almost 7.9 weasels long, close to 3 mouse in a row. To put it in perspective, imagine 4 mouse tanks in a square formation. That's the footprint of one of these Soviet superguns. As for the S-103, only the gun was ever built, so its full chassis dimensions remain a mystery. and if size already made them unwieldy, reloads turned them into logistical nightmares. The Sturmtiger, our baseline, needed a crane and 4 men to complete a reload, a process that took around 10 minutes. Gaijin compresses that into 52 seconds in-game, 40 with an ACID crew. For the Soviet giants, the picture gets worse. Both the Kondensator and Oka required 6 men in support vehicles, could only reload at 0 elevation, and apart from a single round and 2 charges stored in the Kondensator, relied entirely on external carriers. Their practical rate of fire was around 12 rounds per hour, about 1 every 5 minutes. The S-103 made things even more complicated. Its ammunition came in 2 separate parts, shell and propellant, and the gun's unique layout demanded a 2-stage chamber. The projectile sat in a breech compartment separated from the charge by a diaphragm. When fired, part of the gases pushed the shell forward, while the rest vented backward through nozzles to cancel recoil. Think of it like a gigantic piston firing in 2 directions at once. To reload, you needed another vehicle to deliver both components and then seat them into this complex system, making the S-103 the most awkward of all 3. In War Thunder terms, though, the numbers compress nicely. Apply the same ratio as the Sturmtiger, and the Soviets' 5-minute cycle becomes approximately 26 seconds stock and approximately 20 seconds aced. Add a few seconds for crane work and the 0 elevation lock, and you end up with a believable 50-second reload. As for firepower, the parallels are striking. The Sturmtiger launched a 345-kilogram rocket-assisted shell at about 250 meters per second, with 125 kilograms of explosive filler, essentially a 250-kilogram bomb in a shell casing. For the Soviets, naval artillery gives us a guide. Battleships like USS Iowa, Sovietsky Soyuz, and HMS Rodney fired 406mm shells, weighing 860 to 1,080 kilograms, with 68 to 88 kilograms of explosive filler, around 8% of mass. Scaled down, the Kondensator's 570-kilogram shell carried approximately 45 kilograms of filler, about a third of the Sturmtiger's payload. The Oka's 750-kilogram round carried approximately 60 kilograms. And since these weren't TNT but Torpex-class explosives, about 1.5 times stronger, the effective yield rises to 68 kilograms, TNT equivalent for the Kondensator, and 90 for the Oka. For the S-103, lacking solid data, it's reasonable to assume it would have fired the same 420mm shells as the Oka. Compared to the Sturmtiger's 125 kilograms, the Soviets' giants still packed terrifying punch. The Kondensator hit with about half the payload, the Oka nearly 3/4, and both delivered over 80 to 90% of the German monster's blast radius. But raw explosive wasn't the whole story. Where the Sturmtiger lobbed its shell at just 250 meters per second, the Soviet guns hurled theirs at 716 meters per second, nearly 3 times faster, with a confirmed range of 25.6 kilometers and up to 45 kilometers with special ammunition. As for mobility, both the Oka and the Kondensator could reach around 30 kilometers per hour, with power-to-weight ratios of 11.7 horsepower per ton for the Kondensator and 13.6 horsepower per ton for the Oka. For the S-103, no chassis was ever built, but it's fair to assume it would have had a better power-to-weight than the Sturmtiger, giving it at least a slight edge in mobility. After looking at all these stats, it's tempting to say none of this trio could ever work in War Thunder, right? Wrong. The game already gave us a hint of how to make it possible with the latest update, Leviathans, which introduced a new mechanic: multi-vehicle SAM systems. In that setup, one vehicle acts as the radar and the other as the launcher. And without the radar, the system is useless. We could apply the same principle to the Soviet 400mm superguns. Instead of just spawning a Kondensator, Oka, or S-103 by itself, players would need dedicated support vehicles to reload them, a crane truck, and an ammo carrier. If either of those gets destroyed, the gun becomes deadweight, just like a SAM launcher without its radar. This instantly balances the insane destructive potential of a half-ton shell by tying it to vulnerable logistics. Gameplay-wise, that also explains the reload cycle. With external support, they could fire roughly every 50 seconds in-game. Not because the main gun was quick, but because the support chain kept the logistics moving. And since these machines are far too big and clumsy for close-quarters brawls, this mechanic would naturally restrict them to long-range roles. As for battle rating, the sweet spot would be around 7.0. Any lower and they'd turn into anti-cap monsters, deleting entire teams with overpressure. Any higher in map rotations would make them nearly useless. At 7.0, they'd be devastating if left unchecked, but still vulnerable enough to airstrikes, fast tanks, or simply losing their fragile support vehicles. So here's another big question. With such high muzzle velocity, how could these guns ever work in indirect fire, or worse, on smaller maps? This problem is already being discussed in the community because of the new SAM system, and the most practical solution would be to create special deployment zones for these vehicles. They would still be part of the battlefield, but limited to areas closer to the team's side. Think of it like how drone spawns work today. You divide the map into sectors. 4 belong to one team, 4 to the other. The outermost sector holds the airfield, then come the helipads, followed by the SAM and SPG zones, and finally the main battlefield. Whenever one of these superguns fires, it would briefly ping the minimap, revealing its general sector and giving the enemy a chance to react. The second method of balance would be even bigger. Gaijin could start reworking certain maps with semi-historical layouts. Since most maps are already modeled after real locations, opening them up with more space for long-range duels could naturally accommodate SPGs like these. This approach would not only balance the gameplay, but also make the game world feel more authentic, giving players a deeper sense of immersion and satisfaction. In the end, the Kondensator, the Oka, and the S-103 were machines that looked unstoppable on parade, but collapsed under their own weight in reality. They were propaganda first, weapons second. And yet, War Thunder has always thrived on turning impossible projects into playable legends. With mechanics like multi-vehicle support, sector-based deployment, and smarter map design, these Cold War superguns could actually have a place in the game. Balanced right, they'd be terrifying glass cannons, capable of wiping out a cap point with a single shot, but fragile, exposed, and completely dependent on logistics. And let's not forget the S-103, the cursed experiment that never even made it to parade. In-game, it could be the strangest of them all. Complicated reloads, piston-like recoil canceling, and just enough chaos to make it unforgettable. So here's the real question. If Gaijin ever made it happen, would you roll out with the 406mm Kondensator, the 420mm Oka, or the bizarre Recoilless S-103? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this dive into Cold War madness, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Until then, see you on the battlefield.